I'm Caitlyn Mercer, 34 years old, and 6 months ago, my sister slapped me across the face in front of our entire family, told me I had 10 minutes to leave her house, and my parents clapped like she'd just won an award. My cheek was still stinging when I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and said, "Then you all have 5 minutes." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just set it on the table and watched their expressions change. They thought they knew everything about me. The quiet one, the reliable one, the one who never said no. But that folder held something that changed everything, and they weren't ready for it. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button. If you've ever kept the receipts when no one thought you'd speak up, I was born and raised in Central California, in a part of the valley where almond groves stretch out for miles, and folks still wave to each other from dusty pickups my family lived in. A Spanish-style ranch house built in the 50s by my grandparents, who raised children and trees with equal care. My grandmother Beatrice ran the house in the grove with hands like leather and a voice like warm gravel. She taught me how to move slow when pruning and how to watch the soil for signs before the droughts hit hardest. My parents were good people in the way people say. When they mean complicated, they meant well most days and loved loudly when it suited them. But everything shifted when it came to my older sister Cassidy. Cassidy was the bright one, the loud one, the one who filled every room before you even walked in. She wore ambition like perfume, and our parents adored it. She had a flair for business and charm that made people open wallets and forgive mistakes. I was quieter, more practical, always sketching things. Old farmhouses turned into dream homes, irrigation systems reworked for drought seasons. Sometimes I think Grandma saw that in me before anyone else did while our parents drove up to Los Angeles for Cassidy's boutique launch. I was the one who stayed behind taking Grandma to her doctor appointments, checking the soil moisture by hand, and scribbling notes on the back of seed catalogs after Grandma passed. When I was 25, I stayed in the valley, patching roofs and chasing permits, while Cassidy bounced between pop-up stores and marketing expos. Her ideas were big, her follow-through less so, and somehow the loans always came my way. Just $1,000 for startup, she'd say, then $2 for expansion. Mom would smile and call it sisterly love. Dad would shrug and say, Cassidy was going places and I should be proud. But I started writing it all down, every wire transfer, every favor, every repair bill. And I kept it all in a spreadsheet labeled family. Not out of spite, but because something inside me said one day, I'd need proof. I didn't know when the shift started. Exactly. Maybe it was the 3rd time Mom called my designs cute, or when Dad told me the roof leak could wait, because it's just water. Maybe it was the Thanksgiving where Cassidy showed up late with new designer shoes, and everyone complimented her ambition, while ignoring the hand-stitched table runners I'd made from Grandma's old linens. It wasn't a moment. It was a slow erosion, like the way drought takes a grove, not all at once, but inch by inch, until the ground cracks and the roots get exposed. What they didn't know was that one of those cracks led me to something they never meant for me to see. A yellowed envelope buried under irrigation manuals in the garage, stamped in Grandma's hand. The envelope was stiff with age, tucked behind a sagging box of irrigation manuals in the corner of the garage. The air was heavy with dust and old oil, but my hands were steady as I pulled it free. Beatrice's handwriting was unmistakable, curved, slanted, neat, even in her final years. I sat down right there on the concrete floor, legs crossed beside a cracked bucket of nails, and opened it. Inside was a single-page deed, notarized in 2016, listing me, Caitlyn Mercer, as the sole owner of the property. It was dated nearly a full year before Grandma passed. The paper was dry crisp, the ink still dark. I reread it twice before I saw the folded letter underneath signed by Victor Lang, the same lawyer Grandma had trusted since I was in high school. He kept it short. She'd transferred ownership directly to me, naming my parents as tenants at will no conditions. She'd wanted to protect the land to keep it from being paved over by tech developers or turned into condos. Her instructions were clear. Preserve the grove, she wrote, and keep our roots in the soil. I leaned back against the toolbox, sunlight falling through the cracked garage window in long strips. It felt like finding buried treasure, only the treasure had been mine all along. I thought about the water bills I'd paid the roof. I'd patched the nights I'd fallen asleep, worried about tree rot and irrigation schedules. They'd let me carry it all, every dollar, every repair, never once telling me the truth. That night I locked the envelope in my desk drawer and sat at the kitchen table, lit only by the glow of my laptop screen. I started searching California property laws. 4 years. That was the limit to contest a deed like this. That window had closed back in 2020. The transfer was valid. I scanned the deed, attached it to an email, and sent it to Victor just after midnight. He replied before sunrise, "Confirmed, legitimate. They have no legal claim. Proceed with caution." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I made coffee, watered the almond trees, and walked the fence line. The same land my grandmother had walked 100 times before. A week later, I brought up the water bill over dinner. The number had jumped again, $4,000 for the quarter. "The ranch can handle it," I said lightly. My mom didn't look up. "Of course it can. It's our house after all." My dad nodded, too busy chewing to speak. I had my phone recording in my pocket, voice memo running. The casual tone in her voice was what got me. Like she believed it. Like it had never occurred to her that someone might remember what Grandma wanted. The next day, Cassidy called. Her voice was rushed like always, but her tone had changed, sharper, edged with frustration. She was behind on payments again. Tyler, her new husband, wasn't holding up his end. "Can you spot me 10 grand just until the boutique recovers?" I hesitated only for a second. "Sorry," I said. "The ranch is taking everything right now." She didn't say goodbye. Just a long pause, and then the click of the line going dead. That night, I added the moment to my spreadsheet. First refusal, set boundary. I stared at that line for a while, watched the cursor blink like it was thinking too. The lie about the ranch burned hotter than anything else. They'd known for years. Let me sink money, energy, time into a house they pretended was theirs. Cassidy had even floated the idea of selling it last summer during a barbecue, half joking. "We could flip this place for a fortune," she'd said, waving her drink at the peeling stucco. My mom had chuckled. My dad had mumbled something about capital gains, but I'd stayed quiet. Now I knew exactly what they were planning. By fall, I had a plan. I started feeding Cassidy breadcrumbs, small ones. During a phone call, I mentioned land developers buying up almond farms for employee housing. "They're offering cash," I said, "and the water taxes are killing small plots like ours." She didn't say much at first, but I heard the wheels turning. She brought it up again 2 weeks later during a quick stop at the ranch. "Tyler's been saying the same thing she said. We should talk numbers soon." I nodded, rinsing dishes at the sink, while my phone again recorded from my apron pocket. Tyler started showing up more after that. He'd step outside to take calls on the back patio, pacing while talking about bridge loans and seller paperwork. Cassidy started asking more pointed questions, how much the taxes were, whether the roof still leaked. I gave vague answers, made mental notes. Every conversation went into a folder. By early winter, I had over a dozen voice memos and 3 full pages of text messages. It was like watching someone dig their own hole. I just had to make sure they kept going. In January, I met up with Brooke Ellis, my old roommate from UC Fresno. She'd gone into real estate law after burning out in corporate litigation. We met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with exposed brick and reclaimed wood tables. I slid the folder across to her and watched her read. "This is ironclad," she said, tapping the deed. "If they try anything, they're toast." We mapped out a strategy right there on the napkins. If Cassidy pushed the sale, I'd bait her into dismissing me in front of the family. If she got physical, well, that wouldn't be the first time. We'd have the file ready. The call to Brooke prepped the law on our side. Back at the ranch, the bills kept piling up. The water board raised rates again, citing drought conditions. I replaced a cracked irrigation pipe myself, out of pocket $2,000 I never saw back. I logged the expense and kept moving. Cassidy called again in April. $5,000, she said, no preamble. The boutique's inventory is stuck in customs. Mom texted me the next day. Your sister's trying her best. She just needs support. I replied with a single line, I can't help right now. Cassidy didn't reply at all. That spring, the almond trees bloomed late. Pale blossoms clung to the branches like they were bracing for something. I watched them from the back steps, arms crossed, fingers still raw from pipe repairs. Inside the folder sat in my desk drawer. The plan was in motion, and Thanksgiving was just a few months away. The table would be set, the cameras ready, the file zipped shut and waiting. All I needed was for Cassidy to speak first, and I knew she would. The summer heat came early that year, hanging low over the Central Valley like a lid on a boiling pot. The almond grove behind the house was brittle and still branches heavy with fruit that no one had time to pick. I spent most evenings alone in the kitchen, logging invoices into my spreadsheet, the fan clacking overhead, dust settling into corners the way silence settles into a home. The numbers were steady and sharp. $2,000 here for parts, $400 there for a trenching crew I hired last minute. Nothing extravagant, just enough to keep the place running while everything else sagged under the weight of drought and time. Cassidy stopped by once in July, unannounced, pulling up in a leased SUV with tinted windows and idle chatter. She didn't ask about the grove or the roof I'd just patched. Instead, she mentioned a marketing retreat she'd been invited to Palm Springs full of influencers and brand alignment. Her voice curled around the words like they were meant to impress. I nodded politely, handed her a glass of cold tea, and listened while she explained how much the ranch could be worth if we played it right. I didn't argue. I didn't say much at all. I just took mental note of the phrasing. That night, I added a line to the spreadsheet, Cassidy visit, floated sale again, ranch as leverage. The calls from my parents grew more scattered, more transactional. Mom would ask if I'd seen Cassidy lately or if I'd remembered to pay the property tax bill. Dad once asked if the septic tank had been pumped that year. When I said yes, he just grunted. I started recording those calls, 2 short clips, stored on a hard drive labeled quietly with a date, and nothing more. The ranch was mine on paper, but in every other way, I was still just the one expected to handle the mess. Late one evening, after a long day repairing a section of busted drip line in the west field, I came inside to find an envelope on the counter. It was from the water board, another rate adjustment. The increase was almost 12%. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the budget sheet. The grove was barely holding on. I'd rerouted lines, cleaned filters, even patched the main tank myself, but the costs were piling up. And still no one asked, no one offered. They just assumed it would be taken care of like always. In early September, I got a message from Brooke. She'd prepped a few documents on her end letters of ownership copies of the original deed, dated memos confirming the transfer. Just in case, she wrote. I printed 2 sets and placed one inside the kitchen drawer where Grandma used to keep coupons and recipes. The other stayed in my bag, sealed and waiting. I wasn't sure what would come first, Cassidy's pitch to sell or my parents' sudden interest in refinancing, but I felt the shift. It was coming even if no one said it out loud. The valley winds picked up later that month. Dry air blew through the grove, scattering hulls and leaves across the dirt. I watched from the front porch one afternoon as Tyler's car pulled up. He didn't come inside, just sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes talking on the phone. I couldn't hear him, but I saw the way he gestured, big, fast movements, a hand slicing through the air. He left without ringing the bell. That same night, I got a text from Cassidy. Thinking about Thanksgiving, it said. Might be good for the family to finally make some decisions. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I powered off the phone and went outside, walking the length of the grove in the dark. The trees whispered as I passed branches, shifting gently overhead, the earth dry beneath my boots. A week later, my parents stopped by. They said they were just checking in, but their timing was too neat. Mom brought a store-bought pie. Dad glanced around like he hadn't been there in months, though. I knew he had. They asked about the grove, whether the harvest had been good, if the well was holding. I answered every question evenly. Then Mom said, too casually, "It's getting to be a lot for you, isn't it? All this upkeep." I nodded. "It is." She smiled softly, like she thought I was agreeing with her, like she still believed I didn't know. That night I updated the spreadsheet. Parental visit, probing tone, implied transition of control. I was tired. Not angry. Not upset. Just tired. Tired of fixing everything without thanks. Tired of paying for things with no help. Tired of watching Cassidy spin stories that everyone else pretended to believe. I spent the next few weeks organizing files, reviewing legal backups, and checking the recording apps on my phone. Brooke and I ran a few more drills on Zoom, how the reveal would go, what to expect, how to stay calm if things turned ugly. She told me to keep everything simple. Say less. Let them react. I wrote out the steps on a sticky note and tucked it into my planner. The almond grove turned gold as October came. Leaves started dropping in 2s and 3s, little spirals brushing against the window panes. I cleared the guest room. I made space at the table. I stitched new place settings using scraps of Grandma's old fabric things she'd saved in a drawer for years, probably intending to use one day. I ironed them all and laid them across the oak table, one for each person. Not because I expected anyone to notice, but because I wanted something in that room to feel real. By the first week of November, the invitations had gone out. Cassidy confirmed right away. Mom texted me a grocery list. Dad asked if I'd picked up the turkey yet. Everything moved as if it were normal, as if nothing had shifted, as if they weren't about to walk straight into the truth. The night before Thanksgiving, I walked through the grove one last time. The air was cool and quiet. I paused by the oldest tree, the one with the bent trunk near the well, and pressed my hand against the bark. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Inside the file, sat in my bag, zipped and ready. The phone charger was set by the dining room outlet. The recording app had been tested twice. Everything was in place. All that was left was the waiting. They were going to try to sell what they didn't own, and I was going to let them speak first. Thanksgiving morning was clear and cold, the kind of morning where the sky looks too bright for November. I'd been up since before dawn basting the turkey and setting the last of the table linens, hand-stitched napkins made from Grandma's old quilting scraps. The house smelled like sage and roasted almonds. I played a little music to fill the quiet, low enough not to distract. Everything was ready before the first knock came. My bag sat zipped beneath my chair. My phone was charging by the hutch. I'd tested the voice recorder twice. The folder inside the bag held the deed, the memos, and the printout from Victor Lang. Cassidy arrived late like she always did, breezing in with Tyler close behind, and the kids trailing after them, eyes fixed on their new tablets. Her boots clicked across the tile floor. She didn't comment on the table or the food or the embroidered place settings. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, then turned straight to Mom and Dad, who were already waiting in the dining room. They hugged the kids and laughed at something Tyler said. I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer, checking the oven one last time, then joined them. The table was full now. The food was warm. Everyone took their seats. I waited until the dishes were being passed and everyone had settled. Then I spoke, my voice light, almost casual. "The grove's looking good this season," I said, slicing into the stuffing. Hard to believe how much developers are offering for almond land out here these days. Silicon Valley's been circling like buzzards. I saw Cassidy's eyes flick toward Tyler just for a second. He adjusted his cuffs, then looked across the table. "Exactly," he said. "Which is why we're selling. It's time." The fork in my hand didn't move. I kept my face, steady eyes on my plate. "Selling," I said as if I'd misheard. Cassidy nodded, leaning back in her chair. "We've talked about it. The market's perfect. It's the smart move for Mom and Dad's retirement. The ranch isn't getting any easier to manage." She glanced around like she was delivering a speech. I looked toward my mother. "You ran this by me," I asked. "I thought this was Mom and Dad's place." Cassidy's smile tightened. "You're just the helper, Caitlyn. You've always been the helper." That's when it happened. Her hand came across the table, sharp and sudden. The slap landed high on my cheek, hard enough to make the room go quiet. "You've got 10 minutes, she said, her voice low and clipped. "Pack your things and get out of my house." Behind her, Mom clapped softly. "About time," she said. My dad chuckled, nodding along like it was a joke. Tyler didn't say a word. I didn't move right away. I let the silence stretch, let the sting on my face settle. Then I reached for my bag. The manila folder made a solid sound as I laid it on the table just beside the turkey. The flap was sealed. My phone was in my hand. I tapped the voice memo to begin recording. "You all have 5 minutes," I said quietly. "This ranch is mine." The room froze. Cassidy's fork slipped from her hand. Tyler leaned forward, confused. "What is that?" he asked. I didn't answer him. I opened the folder slowly, revealing the notarized deed. Then I tapped the screen and connected to Brooke Ellis via video call. Her face appeared clear and composed, framed by her office bookshelf. "Caitlyn Reed is the legal owner of this property," Brooke said, her voice calm and professional. "Deeded to her in 2016 by Beatrice Klein. Notarized, filed, uncontested under California law. This documentation is valid and complete." Cassidy lunged forward, grabbing at the papers. "This is fake! She forged this." Tyler stood now, pointing. "We'll sue you," he barked. I stayed seated. "You took a $20,000 deposit from a developer for land you don't own," I said. "That's called fraud, Tyler." "Good luck with that." The children stared wide-eyed. Logan looked to me, confused. "Aunt Caitlyn, why are you mad?" Riley whispered something to her mother, but Cassidy ignored her. Brooke spoke again. "You're being recorded. I have copies of all documentation. I strongly advise you to leave before this escalates." Cassidy's hands shook as she pulled Tyler toward the door. "This isn't over," she hissed. The front door slammed so hard the chandelier rattled above the table. The food sat untouched. Steam drifted slowly off the stuffing. My mother picked up her wineglass but didn't drink. My father stared down at his hands. The silence was heavier than the heat from the oven. I ended the call with Brooke and turned to them. "Play this," I said, sliding my phone across the table. The clip I'd recorded in September played softly. Mom's voice came through. "Of course it's our house after all." My father's grip on his fork tightened. My mother blinked quickly, napkin bunched in her lap. "When did you find out I asked my tone even? Was it after Grandma's funeral? Or did Victor call you before then?" She didn't answer. I opened my laptop and brought up the spreadsheet. The rows ran long payments, repairs, transfer fees, materials. $35,000 in upkeep since Beatrice passed, I said. $15,000 in loans to Cassidy, none repaid. This is all under my name. My dad leaned forward. "Cassidy needed that money," he said. "After the divorce, Tyler left her with nothing. She was drowning. You could have helped." "I did help," I said. "For 10 years. He didn't reply. I cued the next audio file, one I'd taken from a visit 2 months earlier. Cassidy's voice filled the room. "Tyler says if we can get Mom and Dad to sign fast, no one will notice. The $20,000 deposit's already in. He's calling it a consulting fee." The clip ended on a muffled laugh. My mother covered her face with both hands. I stood and gathered the plates, stacking them quietly by the sink. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't much left to say. The eviction notice would go out the next morning. The next morning I watched from the kitchen window as the sun rose over the almond grove, the bare branches catching the light like a row of upturned hands. The air was still, but the tension from the day before hadn't lifted. I stood by the sink and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in a house that had once held holiday laughter. The turkey leftovers sat untouched in the fridge, and the linen napkins had dried stiff on the line outside. At exactly 9:00 a.m., I drove into town and filed the eviction notice with the Fresno County Clerk's office. The process was quiet routine. Just a stack of papers, a date stamp, and the start of a 3-day countdown. By Monday afternoon, the notice was served. I printed 2 copies and drove to my parents' side entrance. No one answered when I knocked, so I left them taped to the door, one for Diane, one for Gregory. A neighbor across the road watched from her porch but didn't wave. I got back in the truck and sat there for a long minute watching the breeze shift through the dry orchard rows. I didn't expect anyone to call, and no one did. On the 4th day, I heard the front door open while I was upstairs organizing invoices. Footsteps came in slow, then stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "You're really doing this," my dad said. I walked down and met him in the front hall. He was holding the notice in one hand, his reading glasses still on. "We gave you everything," he said, not raising his voice. "And now you're kicking us out." I didn't answer him. Instead, I pointed to the spreadsheet printed bound and sitting on the entry table beside the mail bin. He didn't pick it up, just shook his head once and left the house without closing the door behind him. Later that week, Cassidy sent a message. Just a few lines. "You got your win. Hope it was worth the wreckage." I didn't reply. I printed it and added it to the file. December was slow and dry. The almond grove slept under brittle skies, and the trees leaned just slightly under the weight of windstorms that passed through without rain. I cleaned the spare room and boxed up the belongings my parents had left scattered throughout the main house. Old tools, storage bins, papers stuffed into drawers. Every time I found a receipt with my name on it, an invoice, a check stub, I added it to the folder. Brooke filed the civil suit just after the New Year unjust enrichment, totaling $40,000 in unreimbursed maintenance supplies and direct payments made under false pretenses. She told me not to expect a settlement. "We're filing to prove a point," she said, "and to make it harder for them to claim ignorance later." The paperwork went out the following Tuesday, with a court date stamped 6 weeks out. Cassidy's situation unraveled faster than I expected. I'd reported the developer deposit, the one Tyler had secured, using forged assumptions of property ownership, as a potential fraud. Mail fraud, technically, since the payment had been sent to an address tied to a false claim. Brooke helped me submit the packet. Within 2 weeks, a federal inquiry had been opened. Tyler's finances were combed through by the IRS, and what they found, unclaimed consulting income, offshore transfers, and a stack of unpaid business taxes, was enough to launch a formal audit. In January, I drove past their old place in the suburbs and saw a for sale sign planted in the frost-hardened lawn. The house was still full, but the lights were off. By February, the boutique was gone. A judge approved a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing, and Cassidy's remaining inventory, clothing racks, shelving a few branding materials, were liquidated in a warehouse auction. I didn't go, but someone sent me photos. Her logo had been painted over with tape. My mother called once during a late afternoon when the grove was quiet and the mail truck had just pulled away. I let it ring. She didn't leave a message. A week later, a letter arrived from the nursing home in Clovis, a forwarding address, nothing more. They'd checked in under their legal names, no mention of the ranch or of me. When the small claims hearing finally came, I wore a navy blouse and boots with clean heels. Brooke had prepped me, but the case moved faster than we expected. I showed the receipts. I explained the water systems, the roof repairs, the costs, logged faithfully over 9 years. My parents said little. The judge reviewed the spreadsheet for less than 5 minutes before rendering a decision, $28,000 awarded for documented out-of-pocket expenses. No damages, no emotional claims, just numbers. The gavel fell and it was over. News travels fast in the valley even when names aren't attached. Someone on a Fresno forum posted a thread titled, "Almond Grove Betrayal Family Tries to Flip Ranch Gets Evicted Instead." I hadn't written it, but I recognized the tone. The post was picked up by a local newspaper the following week. No names were printed, but the details were enough. A few people reached out with stories of their own land disputes, family splits, inheritances that vanished. I stayed quiet. Let the article do what it needed to do. Back at the ranch, I trimmed the dead branches and cleaned the western fence line. It had been a hard winter. The well was holding, but barely. I installed new timers on the drip lines and replaced the broken solar panel on the southern pump. There were things to be fixed always. But for the first time in years, none of it felt like debt. In the evenings, I sat in the quiet room near the east window, the one Grandma used to read in, and updated my ledger. Every receipt, every form, every text message filed labeled stored. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I finally understood that sometimes the only way to rebuild is to begin again with clean lines and clear paper. The locks were changed on the second Monday of March. A local locksmith came out just after lunch, quiet and professional, nodding politely as I handed him the original deed and pointed out the entrances. He didn't ask questions. I stood by the front steps while he worked the air cool and dry, early almond blossoms drifting down like bits of ash. The new keys were cold in my palm. When he left, I walked through the house slowly, one room at a time, listening to the creaks in the floorboards, checking the windows, flipping each light switch on and off. Everything still smelled faintly of cinnamon and furniture wax. Their boxes were gone. Their presence wasn't. Outside, the almond grove was beginning to bloom again. The western fence had sagged a little from winter storms, but the pump was working and the new timer system held steady. I'd made it through the season without help. No weekend drop-ins, no phone calls asking about water bills or irrigation. Just work, steady clear, and mine. I swept the porch that evening, made a cup of tea, and turned in early. It was the first night in 10 years the house felt quiet for the right reasons. Cassidy's world collapsed in fast, sharp pieces. The IRS audit led to a fraud referral. Tyler's name showed up on documents tied to multiple consulting fees that hadn't been reported, some tied to shell accounts, some linked directly to business loans never disclosed during the divorce. Brooke helped me send copies of the original developer deposit, along with Cassidy's voice memo recorded at the ranch, time-stamped and geotagged. That alone was enough to trigger a closer look. In early April, Tyler was subpoenaed in connection to several mail fraud claims involving post-dated checks and falsified grant applications. Cassidy filed for emergency custody of the kids within a week, citing financial instability and ongoing legal threats. The court granted her temporary guardianship but stripped her of spousal support. No steady income, no active business, and a pending bankruptcy meant she was flagged for monitoring. Logan and Riley were placed under alternating supervision, shuttled between a rented 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Fresno and a supervised facility near Clovis. A few days later, a letter came in from Cassidy's attorney asking if I'd be willing to provide a character reference to help stabilize the custody arrangement. I didn't respond. I scanned the letter, saved a copy, and filed it away. There was nothing I could offer that wouldn't make things worse for everyone involved. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on the land. I applied for a state conservation grant one Beatrice had told me about years ago, but never pursued. It came through in mid-May, covering most of the cost to upgrade the well pump and transition to solar-powered irrigation. I hired a part-time hand from a neighboring farm, a young guy named Emmett Vaughn, who worked weekends and helped with hauling and maintenance. He didn't ask about the family, and I didn't volunteer it. We kept things simple: morning check-ins, task lists on a whiteboard, and coffee breaks on the porch. I launched the new design project in June. Valley Roots designs a hybrid service offering custom restoration plans for historic homes and curated grove tours that honored the agricultural history of the Central Valley. Brooke helped me set up the LLC paperwork, and I rented a small booth at the summer co-op market in downtown Fresno. By the end of the month, I had 10 new clients. One of them booked a full restoration of a 1920s adobe cottage north of Madera. Another offered to feature my story in a local architecture newsletter. I declined the interview, but I sent along photos of the Grove. The first revenue check cleared in July, $70,000. Enough to clear my equipment debt, expand the team, and repair the southern fence line. I bought a used truck, nothing fancy, just reliable, and installed motion lighting around the barn. My old bedroom became the new drafting studio, and I moved into the master suite where Beatrice used to sleep with her window cracked open to smell the orchard. Somewhere in that stretch of weeks, I started seeing someone, a landscape architect named Ben Holloway from Modesto. We'd met at a restoration conference earlier in the year, swapped a few notes on adobe weatherproofing, and stayed in touch over email. He came down one weekend to walk the Grove with me and ended up staying for dinner. We didn't talk about the past, not at first. Just plant soil pH and the best time of year to prune back drought-resistant hedges. The pace was slow and steady, two people who knew how to work with their hands and keep things alive. Cassidy sent one last message in August. This time it wasn't angry, just a short paragraph. She needed help covering Riley's therapy bills, said she'd understand if I ignored it. I read it twice, then deleted it without saving a copy. The next day, I took my sketch pad out to the edge of the Grove and sat beneath the oldest tree, the same one Grandma used to lean against after a long morning in the sun. I watched the light shift through the leaves, golden and low, the way it gets near the end of summer. Emmett was fixing a gate off in the distance. Ben would be by later with coffee. I turned to a clean page in the notebook and started to draw lines, clean margins wide. There wasn't any anger left in me, just space, just peace. The court ruling came through in early September final and stamped in blue ink. The judgment from the civil suit held $28,000 awarded for unreimbursed costs tied to the ranch upkeep filed under unjust enrichment. No appeals, no negotiations, just a mailed envelope with the ruling clipped to a check issued by the court's escrow office. I deposited it quietly at the bank in town, where the teller smiled without asking questions. I used the funds to upgrade the barn roof and install a backup water line running to the south field. Cassidy had stopped contacting me by then. Tyler's fraud case had moved to federal court. His assets were frozen. He lost his license to operate as a consultant and disappeared from local directories altogether. The boutique website was gone. Their house had sold in a short sale, and the realtor's sign now leaned against a storm-battered hedge in a different neighborhood 2 zip codes away. I checked the public records just once, to confirm what I'd heard. Custody had shifted again. A rotating supervision plan had been issued for Logan and Riley. The phrase non-relative monitored exchange was typed next to Cassidy's name. I printed the file, but I didn't keep it. The final IRS decision came a week later. Tyler was found liable for more than $50,000 in unpaid taxes, penalties, and misreported income across 5 years. The fraud report I'd filed with Brooke, copies of the original deposit voice memos invoices, and flagged bank transfers had been folded into the audit. That was the final nail. Brooke forwarded me the closing letter. I didn't open it right away. It sat unopened in my inbox for 2 days. Meanwhile, work at the ranch moved forward. Emmett helped reinforce the north fence line after a dry windstorm pulled up 2 posts. We installed a new tank lid on the main well-added compost to the outer rows and built a gravel path leading out to the older part of the Grove. I cleared the guest room and turned it into a storage space for tour materials, laminated maps, historical photos of the Klein family farm, an old ledger where Beatrice had handwritten bloom dates for each row of trees. Clients kept coming. I signed 2 new projects in Sacramento, both tied to co-op redevelopment efforts. One was a schoolhouse being converted into a cultural center. The other was a Victorian fixer-upper being preserved for a heritage housing pilot. The work was steady and clean. The pay arrived on time. Ben drove down most weekends. He helped install native drought-tolerant plantings along the perimeter of the eastern field and suggested a few changes to the irrigation timer to maximize water flow through the hottest weeks. He never pried. We worked in rhythm, quiet mornings, shared tasks, clean breaks. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch afterward and listen to the owls behind the barn. One evening I pulled the spreadsheet back up. The same one I'd started all those years ago, before the slap at Thanksgiving, before the deed, before the truth unraveled across a dining room table that had once belonged to my grandmother. Every line still lived there. Every invoice, every wire transfer, every call that ended in a request. I didn't delete anything. I just scrolled to the bottom and added one more line. Final award received. Total repaid $28,000. Status closed. I saved the file and backed it up in 2 places. Not long after the local paper ran a weekend feature on agricultural preservation in the valley. The piece highlighted small farms fighting back against drought and development. There was a photo included of me in the orchard, standing beside one of the older trees, clipboard in hand. They didn't use my name, but it was clear enough to anyone local who had followed the court records or Reddit threads. A week after that article ran, someone left a handwritten note in my mailbox. No return address. It wasn't signed. The paper was lined folded twice. She was a terrible mother. I'm sorry it took this long for someone to say it out loud. D. I didn't show it to anyone. I didn't need to. I tucked it in the same drawer where I kept the court order and the notarized deed documents that told the truth quietly and without drama. Fall came early that year. The first fog rolled in by mid-October, soft and low across the orchard rows. I walked the grove with a thermos most mornings, checking for new limb growth, tracking soil moisture, listening for what the land still needed. The house stayed warm, the pipes held steady, and the new solar array on the barn roof worked better than I expected. At night, I slept without needing a fan to drown out the silence. No tension humming behind closed doors. No whispered phone calls. No sudden knocks from someone wanting more. It wasn't just that justice had been served. It was that I'd survived long enough to carry it out to the end. By the time the last of the autumn leaves fell across the orchard, the house felt entirely mine. Not because of the deed or the court rulings or the locks, but because it finally held only the things I chose to carry. The walls were quiet. The air was steady. Some mornings I'd wake to the smell of earth and wood smoke, and it would take a moment to remember I didn't have to brace for anything. I kept working slow, consistent, careful. The design studio stayed busy with new clients, and the almond grove kept me grounded between projects. Ben started coming by more often. We replanted part of the southern edge together, setting in native grasses and wildflowers where the old rows had grown thin. In the evenings, we'd walk the outer fence line with mugs of tea, watching the light stretch across the dry hills. Nothing grand, just steady days. Just enough. I never heard from Cassidy again after that last message. I read somewhere that the boutique's trademark had expired and someone else had picked up the name. I don't know what became of Tyler after the court rulings, and I didn't try to find out. The last I heard from our parents was a forwarded invoice from the nursing facility addressed by mistake to the ranch. I returned it unopened with a handwritten note, incorrect recipient. No longer at this address. There was no grand reunion, no apology, no closing chapter where everyone sat around a table and made amends. But there was peace, there was space. And sometimes that's enough. I kept the spreadsheet not out of resentment, but because it reminded me that facts matter. That keeping track, even when no one's watching, can be its own kind of power. I never expected it to bring justice. I just didn't want to be the only one who remembered what had happened. In time, the grove began to feel like home again. I opened it for weekend tours in the spring, small groups, quiet walks, a few stories about drought seasons and heritage almonds. People came from nearby towns and out of state. Some just wanted to see the trees. Others came to feel something rooted, something that had lasted. One afternoon, an older woman stayed behind after a tour. She didn't ask questions, just stood for a long time with her hand resting on the bark of the oldest tree. When she turned to leave, she said, "I don't know what you had to do to hold on to this, but I'm glad you did." I didn't respond. I just nodded. There wasn't anything more to say. There's a kind of quiet that comes after the noise is gone. Not empty, just honest. And in that quiet, I found something I hadn't realized I'd lost room to build again. Room to breathe without bracing. Room to grow something that didn't have to be hidden. If there's anything I'd share with someone listening, it's this: hold your ground, even when it shakes beneath you. Keep your records, guard your roots, and know that survival isn't just getting through. Sometimes it's learning how to stay on your terms in your name, with your hands on the land that made you. Thank you for walking this story with me. If you've ever had to reclaim your peace after losing too much, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're still finding your way, just know it's not too late to plant something new.